Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for CIMA E1 covering the area of Mixed Bank 5 in the BPP practice and exam kit. And in this first question, 18.1, we're asked to look at organizational structures and to advisory on which one would be lend itself more to flexibility and multiple reporting. And what we should remember about structures, in particular the matrix structure, which is the one that's relevant here, is that a matrix structure is essentially where we have a number of projects and indeed a number of departments or functions. So really, where we have a matrix structure, we will have an individual, let's say, part of the IT function or the accounting function, also involved in project work. So that will lead to, in effect, dual reporting, and certainly flexibility is associated with that. In fact, this idea of this dual line of command does create problems for people working within project management using the matrix structure. So the dual reporting will take place obviously between the individual and their own line manager, perhaps in the accounts department, and also the project manager. So certainly that lends itself to this idea of multiple reporting. Okay, so in this particular case, the matrix was relevant. So when you see sort of project or multiple reporting, do think matrix. Okay, 18.2, really reasonably straightforward question if we're familiar with what corporate governance means, and our definition would invariably be something along the lines of the way in which a company or an organization is managed and controlled or directed and controlled. And do remember that corporate governance is about sort of controlling the controllers. Obviously, we've had a number of corporate scandals and frauds over the last sort of 20, 25 years, and the beginnings of corporate governance was very much in the UK, certainly the Cadbury report back in 1992 and a series of reports since then, culminating in the UK Combined Code. Okay, so certainly A is relevant there. The other ones are certainly not linked into the way in which an organization is directed or managed and controlled. Okay, next question we have is one where we have a series of possibilities, either true or false. A little bit tricky in places, so you be careful with this type of question. Just try to think them through logically. Okay. Now, in terms of this first statement, we're on the issue of variances. Now, we know what a variance is. It's obviously the difference between actual and a budgeted figure. And really what they're saying is, should all variances be investigated? Well, no, they shouldn't, because we're only really interested in variances that are significant, or what we would call material. So we would have some form of materiality level, let's say €1,000, for example, and where variances are in excess of that, we'd certainly investigate them, but if they're below that, we wouldn't. So certainly all variances don't need to be investigated, so the answer is false. Okay, in this next one here, also related to variances, only possible after budgeting. Well, that's sort of true, I guess, because really what we're saying is that we need to have a measure. We need to have a standard. We can't come up with a variance if we don't have some sort of measure to measure actual against. So that statement is in fact true. Variances are only possible after comparing with some sort of budget or standard. Okay. Next one here, budgets help identify the loan. Well, certainly they do. I mean, think about a budget. We're looking at, let's say, a budgeted forecast, a cash flow forecast. We'll be able to see what the difference is between what we forecast our cash position is going to be and obviously what it may actually be. So budgets will certainly help us identify problem areas or deficits or potential shortfalls given our anticipated level of expenditure and indeed income going forward. So that statement is true. In terms of budgets being the sort of domain of the treasury function, well, that's not true. I mean, the treasury function will be concerned, with really obtaining finance at favorable rates, and also investing money perhaps on the markets, investing funds. So strictly speaking, that is wrong. I would have thought that the management accountant or the management accounting function will be responsible for budgets and not the treasury function. Okay. Looking further into 18.4, really system, an information system allowing us to solve problems associated with techniques normally used by human experts. It has to be an expert system, and in fact a database system, a sort of a drill down system where in effect the system is replicating a human expert. So in this case the answer is A. Okay. 18.5, we see this client-vendor relationship, and I guess, by looking at the answers we should be able to see that, when we talk about a client-vendor, we're really talking about sort of a customer and then outsourced function, as it were. So, client-supplier, as it were, and that's got to be relevant to some form of outsourcing, this idea that we're pushing out one of our functions to a supplier. They're in fact going to be the vendor, as it were, supplying that function for us, hopefully at a lower cost. So A is the answer there for 18.5. Okay, 18.6 talks about supply chain. Now, what is that? We should be familiar with supply chains from our studies of, Porter's value chain. What is a value chain? What is a supply chain? Well, certainly the value chain is that chain within an organization. In other words, the series of activities, primary and support, primary and secondary activities that sort of make up an organization. And a supply chain is essentially just a group of interconnected companies really working together through linkages. So obviously, given that definition, if we're familiar with it, we can see that certainly a number of different companies would be involved in a supply chain. The other answers are not relevant at all. Okay. In terms of quality, service quality factors, certainly each of these, responsiveness, communication, and competence, we're really saying that, what factors are important when you're delivering a service and you're thinking about the quality of that service. These are important. I can't really see that integrity as such, or perhaps honesty, is an important factor. So really A, C, and D would certainly be relevant, but integrity not relevant to the quality level of a particular service. With 18.8, we're obviously referring to the product life cycle. Good idea to learn these off, these 5 areas, and we should see that that shakeout occurs between growth and maturity. So answer C. Okay, what are we doing? Well, we're just really shaking out the weakest sort of elements of the market, the weakest companies, and then moving forward from there to market maturity, as it were. Okay. 18.9, this answer here, this question here, bear with me 1 second. A little bit tricky because it involves the examiner examining quite a few different areas. I'm sure that they'll have a lot of fun writing these types of questions because they're examining just a host of different types of areas, some a little bit tricky. Now, big data, we should be familiar with that. It's an inclusion in your syllabus from this year onwards, highly likely to be examined. We're hopefully familiar with Laney and the 3 V's in terms of the definition there. And really sort of big data is concerned with data from unstructured sources, looking at it and finding trends. Okay, so over and above that, expert system, we've just touched on that. Obviously, it's geared towards sort of replicating human behavior, as it were, and really providing the user of the system, the user of the IS, with a means for making decisions based on a database of expert information. Okay, relationship marketing, very much a two-way process, certainly avoids harassment or unsolicited communication between the company and the individual concerned. And postmodern, really, seen as perhaps the way to go forward from here in terms of marketing. Trying to involve the customer in the brand, build a relationship again, and certainly not static. So what I've listed below here is really how I see these different items fitting in with expert. Clearly, what we're seeing here is the ability to take in user input, so the sort of user querying the system in relation to, in this particular case, a holiday, so climate activities to come up with their perfect holiday. So that's very, very much sort of drilling down by providing input into a system that's sort of, rather than going to a travel agent, the system will come up with a perfect holiday for you. Okay, and this one here, postmodern, as I've said, it's sort of, perhaps seen as the sort of the new thing, as it were, and certainly with all the advantages in technology and IT. In this particular case, we see that this idea of a camera phone being pointed at another person using an app, and users are being encouraged to sort of upload pictures of themselves wearing virtual clothing to be used in a company website. You can see that it's very much sort of a new way of looking at marketing, certainly not static, and you're really involving the customer big time in the brand itself. Big data, as we've said above, this is unstructured data. When you've got photos and you've got sort of emails, really this idea that a business could use that information and tailor adverts to you is very much how big data operates and what it's all about. Some criticisms of it, of course. In terms of relationship marketing, really what we're saying here is that the company here is it never sends an unsolicited email. It is interested in asking about recent purchases, etc., improvements of service. So really what we're saying is that the system itself, instead of capturing a little bit of information about the individual, try not to harass the individual, but picking up information and using that information. A little bit of a crossover perhaps between postmodern and relationship marketing, but this is the way that I would suggest you pan out this particular answer. Okay. Next one here, final one, 18.10, is really just this idea of HR and what we think about HR. And we should know that HR obviously these days is about people being assets, or human resources, human capital. It's about managing that asset. So we're asked to really decipher here as to, what's not a valid outcome of current sort of HR strategy or management strategy. And certainly these would be, for example, financial outcomes, the sort of the impact of wages or increases in wages, behavioral outcomes. Obviously HR is concerned with the behavior of staff, and indeed performance outcomes. So, efficiency, HR is interested in managing that asset, and that asset, or the use of that asset, being efficient. Process outcomes, really more concerned with the operation of the business rather than HR. So for example, the production process. So again, maybe the sort of question we just need to learn or rote learn. Okay, hopefully that's been helpful, and good luck in your studies. Many thanks.